All right. Welcome to Verum Fabula Fellowship. I'm Wes Mullins, and this is, what day of the week is this?
What day?
Monday.
The October the 18th.
October the 18th. Fantastic. Year is almost done. We are in Rabbit Room at Drinkling's Coffee House in Wilmore, Kentucky, discussing, this is the last installment of Out of the Silent Planet, Lewis's Ransom or Sci-Fi trilogy. All right, so I'm going to open the floor because one of our esteemed members was not here last week, and I'm sure she has a lot that she wants to get through, and we're just going to take your comments and selections. I have a few selections myself. But I'm going to go see what hits you guys and what you guys wrestled with and what you guys are bringing to the table.
Where did you guys end last week? Again, do you know around what page?
We got through the harass
pages. Really.
We didn't. So we basically his time with the harass and the Hanakra. And then he was getting ready to go to the Sorns.
That's so many words.
So we had not yet broached his pilgrimage to the Sorns, and then on to
the sojourn with the Sorns.
The sojourn with the Sorns, yes, nice. That was
Nice.
Good alliteration. And to the Oyarsa. So we haven't got there yet. So if you want to start there, if you want to go back and hit some topics from last
Let
time.
me read through this one page real quick. If anybody else wants to go, then I'll be good.
Okay.
Like I said, I didn't highlight, so let me go back to this one page, and then I'll be good to go.
All right. So does anyone else have anything that in the last section here that you guys wanted to touch on?
Oh, okay, sorry, I'm ready.
Okay, go.
Sorry. I thought this was just a telltale sign of C.S. Lewis. It's funny how going back and reading his fiction stuff now, after I read his nonfiction, you see like little bits he throws in of his theology that I don't think I would have noticed before. But on my page, it's on 114. This will fall apart. So he just is talking about, I'll just read this short little paragraph. How do you pronounce the P people? Start with I assume the P is silent, but...
Piffle-tricky.
Piffle-tree?
Or
Fiddle-tricky.
Or fiddle-tricky.
The narrator on the book that I
fiddles.
listened to.
There's a fiffles.
Yeah, it was
Piffle-trickies.
Fiddle-trickies. Duh.
Okay, well, basically, this is like the middle of the page, page 114. He says, this is kind of like when they were going through the drawings, I think. I don't know the context exactly, but when they were going through the drawings that he had on the rock, I think that's where this is, but I'll have to read a little bit more to see. Yeah, so he says, he saw a picture of the planets not now arranged to make a map of the solar system, but advancing in a single procession towards the spectator, and all save one, bearing its fiery charioteer. And so you keep going down, and he basically just says, I expect it is like me as I look to your people. He said, it is not how they would draw me in my own world. And no, said the fickle tree, I do not mean it to be too like, and they will not believe it. Those who are born after. And so that really just stood out to me as the whole, this is the theme of VFX, like imagination and reason, and how you put those two together. And I thought this is just such a theme we see throughout Lewis's nonfiction work about the importance of that. And how that can spur you onward is to have that part of imagination that we can't really grasp, that transcends us, but we need that to be able to really see truth. And if we don't have that, then there's no point in faith and all these other things that we discussed. So I thought that was just a little one-liner that he threw in that was good. Like, not too like or they won't believe it. Not too unlike and they won't believe it either.
So that's why he doesn't like allegory, because allegory is a one-to-one. He likes analogy, which allows you to allude to something, but you don't ever really hit it, because you can't really hit it, because language is metaphorical.
Right.
So
it's transposition again. Everything
transposition.
I pull apart is just my favorite parts of transposition, just put in different words.
Even Steve Jobs had when he made Next, if you guys remember that computer system that he made it was the black cube. You remember that? Oh, I guess you don't. Okay.
So young.
It was before the Macintosh and all that kind of stuff. He had after the Macintosh, but he was making a new computer system, and he called it Next, and it was a black cube. And it wasn't perfectly a cube because the eye sees perfectly cubes as imperfect. It was an imperfect cube that our eyes saw as a perfect cube. And he was saying, because he said this should be in the Guggenheim, is what he was saying that his stuff should be because it was so good. But it wasn't perfect. It was like perfect, but it wasn't actually, because we would see the perfect as imperfect.
Yeah, it kind of goes even deeper to like the Shadowlands and what that's like, and it's like this, but it's not this. Just pulling on that thread, I feel like he always kind of throws in something in his fiction work about that. That's good.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, and there's a lot of Great Divorce as well. Draws a lot of those similar, like but not like parallels. Which is it's also interesting when you think about Aslan. He's the closest thing he's got to allegory, as he's so much like Jesus. But there's times where you're like, that's not exactly the same. There's like a couple of things in there that just clunk out of place. And I can't remember a specific one right now, but I remember I've read the books like I don't even know how many times, an embarrassing amount of times. And like there's something every now and then I'll read something and I'm going, it's not exactly akin, but I can see how he would get there. But it's not the same. And it's interesting.
Even though he gets accused of it being a Christian allegory, it's not.
Yeah. I like how you said clumps along. Because it is, you'll be reading smoothly and you're like, wait, what was that? Because we're thinking Jesus, of course, like not even on purpose, maybe subconsciously when you read it, you're like, oh, that's Jesus. And then you keep reading and it clumps along a paragraph and you're like, wait, he did what? And it makes sense with the story, but it doesn't make sense with our ideology of who Jesus is. So it's just different.
And in that sense, he's talking too about, in the Aslan example, he's a Christ-like figure in a lot of ways, but also he's going for a different audience there, which is a whole nother, like several different races of creature and a different world with different rules, with different way it came about. And the same thing happens here in this. There's like the fall of Malachanra wasn't their own doing. So I think some people have speculated that death wasn't introduced on that planet until after our Oyarsa reached out his hand to try to swipe away the atmosphere of that planet, and then after that happened, then pain was introduced to those creatures. And before it was kind of like a pre-fall society, and then it became something else, but still not like Earth, because none of them had actively chosen to walk away, and the Oyarsa on there unbodied those who would have, which is also a really
unbodied.
Cool idea. It's like thinking about it like in that sense, like, oh, this angelic being, for lack of a better word, is literally inciting death in order to save. In cutting them off from what they could not resist, and pushing them on to the next stage of their journey. Some people would see that as evil, but it's actually for their own good in ways they can't possibly imagine.
Well, that's a lot of the wrestling that I do in Paralandra is one of those. And it has to do with a similar theme as that. So, any thoughts on that?
To add to that, something similar happens until we have cases just with particularly with the trying to draw those but not exactly things where it's the Cupid character.
Yeah.
Very similar to, and that's just think it brings into focus what Lewis is trying to do with developing, not to Tolkien's level, but developing these kind of proto-mythologies without, of course, he sees that very much as mythology, but even in Narnia. And then here, they have, in fact, I think they have a whole section where he talks about mythology in this world and how they don't see things in so black and white terms as history versus not. You've seen C.S. Lewis say mythology is not the same thing as analogy.
Yeah.
It's not the one for one. But it's,
It's not either or, it's in both and for him. And he does it again too, and he kind of does it again. He shows that theme a lot, but one of the other times I can remember is end of Screw Tape Letters, where the bomb that comes in and just kills the main character is actually like the worst thing that could possibly happen to Screw Tape and Norwood. It's like, great, now he's gone on, we totally lost this opportunity, you blew it. And you know, and like in our eyes, like, he got killed by a bomb. And then it's like, nope, that was awesome. Great.
It's a good book.
Yeah.
I think this whole scene where the Weston and Oyarsa conversation is pretty interesting. Yeah, because I think it connects back with like a lot of the earlier concerns over like moral technology and or how technology is being used in a moral or immoral kind of way. And their conversation around death is interesting because he talks to Weston about like this whole project of science. And I was thinking about this today because in the car we were ironically listening to a podcast about alligators. And this connects actually, but there's a podcast called Stuff You Should Know.
I love that podcast. I listen to that.
But this whole podcast about alligators, they went on this side tangent about like, you know, suffering and evil in the natural world and how actually we really want to create a biosphere about where suffering, even animal suffering and natural suffering and death and stuff like that don't occur. So let's create this biosphere where alligators don't kill, you know, hogs on the side of a swamp or something like that. And I'm like, so reading this, it's like Weston's whole motivation, maybe not his motivation, his rationality for his motivation is the survival of the human race, right? And that's not itself necessarily bad, but the way that Oyarsa responds to him, I think, is pretty instructional for us, especially now. You know, way back then, definitely when we were writing in the 30s and all of this kind of stuff was starting to come ahead. But the more and more we're able to look at ridding ourselves of diseases and cancers, and you know, even that question occasionally, which I think is a ridiculous question, but I think it comes frequently enough. Can we ever like rid ourselves of death? You know, I think Lewis has a lot to say about that.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of interesting bioethics smashed into that one. Yeah, he's got all kinds of good stuff in there.
But that is, I mean, even the irreligious. What is the goal of the irreligious? Let's look at the naturalist and atheist point of view. Their goal is through science to have longevity, to increase life, and the ultimate goal is to not suffer and not die. Even if you're a naturalist, your goal is, how can I prolong my life? So we have trans-species AI coming, right? Can I get my consciousness to live forever, even though my physical body may not? Can I, the I in me, can that extend? So even the irreligious still have, and for me, that's the longing. That's Lewis seeing the island and the longing of I want something, but I don't know what it is. It's news from a country I've never been to. The tune of I've never heard before, and I know I want it, but it can't be satisfied on this earth. So therefore, I must be made for another world type thing. And so, yeah, Lewis pulls on that so much, and I like how he brings all this up. He takes us to another world, which is, as David said, sort of in between pre-fall and post-fall, some kind of in there, and then he wrestles with it, and he wrestles with bioethics. He wrestles with good death, bad death, and suffering, and it's awesome because then we get to see, well, how did Ransom do this? What was this? And the wisdom. For me, it's easier, and Lewis would say the same, to write a book like Screw Tape.
Right.
because we know what the devil's thinking. You know, we know that line of thinking because our thinking is very. But to transcend that to an Oyarsa type wisdom, that's incredible to have that ability to, because he's steel manning the entire arguments. I mean, Weston's designs and is like you say, his rationale is not necessarily inherently wrong,
Right.
but the way he goes about it, and to steel man the argument and then to defeat that, Lewis does over and over and over again.
He even goes so far as to have Weston actually be truly almost as selfless as he can be in this situation, which is really interesting. Something I didn't really consider that much until I think this time around. He truly is like, no, I don't care if I die. And he
Right.
actually believes it. Like, you
Yes.
see it in his actions. He's almost just like,
He's a true believer.
yeah, he's like, whatever.
And it
Which
also-
which plays into the second novel a lot.
Yes.
But it's remarkable how well he makes his argument, and then Oyarsa just kind of pulls it down, Jenga style, out from the bottom one. It just
shows that ideas sometimes from the top view do look so good. Like thinking about, I don't know if any of you have watched that new show that everybody's raving about, Squid Game. It's
I've
really
heard that.
Yeah,
I've heard it like
my son's
3 times
watching
this
it.
week.
Okay, it's unreal. I mean, it's written top notch written story. Like I don't know if you know the story, but the guy started writing the script in 2008 when he was super poor, lived with his grandma in South Korea, had $600 to his name, went through all of his last penny writing the script, and then had to sell his laptop like mid writing because he had no money. And then for 10 years he printed it out. For 10 years he tried to get producers to produce the show. Couldn't find anyone. Then after 10 years in 2018, someone took it and ran with it. Now it's Netflix's most profitable show in history. So the story's remarkable that the guy did this. But anyways, the premise of it is the same thing. He causes this moral dilemma because the guy, I'm not going to spoil anything, but the guy who creates the games, which basically kill a ton of people, and it's little kid games where they die. It's like they play these kid games and they die. Like people are just, every round 50 people, 100 people die. But the trick is he allows, it's not like Hunger Games where there's a reaping and they make people choose. It's like, or they choose people. This time the people are so in debt that they come volunteer. And so it's like so screwed up that they have choice in it. And anytime they want to leave, they can leave. And so it's just like this weird moral, you have an issue with it because the people are so evil who are doing this, but also they keep saying, like one guy was kind of cheating at one point in the game, like that worked for the games, and they executed him and told everyone that was playing, they're like, hey, this is all about fairness. Like all these people have had inequality their whole life, and we're giving them a second chance now. And so it's just like makes you so messed up because you're like, I hate these people, but also they're so sold out to thinking this is true good. Like
What are the greatest villains? The greatest villain is compassionate Satan.
Right.
Thanos.
And then, like you said, the Jenga blocks, you have someone like Oyarsa who like pulls apart these little things, and at the end, which you have in Squid Game as well, you have someone who pulls apart those little pieces, and are like, at the end, of course, someone's like, I'm not playing your game. Like, I don't care if you think this is for good, it's evil. And it just takes one person like that, or one figure to kind of unravel the whole thing. But until then, all these people, including the audience, is so convinced that this is for good. So it's interesting. It's really interesting stories like that.
Is it a miniseries or is it just a?
It's 9 episodes.
Is that it?
I think it's a one-off.
They set it up for a season 2 for sure, but it still closes all loose ends. You're not left like they just kind of set it up where they could continue on if it gets renewed. But it's a amazingly well written.
And they will, but it'll be worse.
Yeah, it will.
It'll be worse.
It for sure will. It's gruesome. I'll say that. It's very gruesome.
It's probably not the show for Nina.
Yeah, they definitely watched Saw. Whoever the creator of this had to have been obsessed with the movie Saw. But at the end of the day, the plot is just unreal. How it keeps you on the edge of your seat. And I'm not a binge show. I don't like binging shows, but I binge that show.
Definitely a journey into depravity if you can stomach it. But my goodness, is it bloody?
Yeah, agreed.
Oh, thanks.
And a little bit it doesn't need to.
I'll watch
That's
Care
my-
Bears.
Yeah, I agree with
That's
that.
my big beef with it. It's
I
like,
agree.
It doesn't.
Doesn't
They
need
could
to
have done
be
this
that
so
bad.
much better if they didn't do that. But it was the wow factor for them.
I agree.
Matthew kept telling me with very detailed for me. Finally, I had to say, stop. I don't need to hear anymore tonight. I'm getting ready to go to bed. Even just hearing about it.
I don't need it in my dreams.
You watched it all, right?
I've actually only watched the first 2 episodes.
Oh, see, the first 2 are the least. Those are the ones I was like almost quit. I was like, this is not that good. Like the first episodes are average. Episodes 3 and on, you are just and there's plot twist after plot twist after plot twist that are, you know.
They could have done it more like what they did at the beginning of the second episode with the person, like when they were doing all those boxes,
Yeah.
you know, the obvious coffins, and then you
With bows on them.
Yeah, and then you hear the banging, and then the hand come out, and then the guy just pushes it back
And
and
slams
staples
it.
it shut. And like,
That's the end of the episode.
it's like
yeah.
that's way worse
Oh,
than
yeah.
what they actually show you.
Oh yeah.
And they could have done it all like that, but they didn't. And that's my beef. That's cinema beef.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I agree. I was kind of. I'm one of those people who, if there's a popular show, I want every reason not to like it. Because I'm like, there's a reason it shouldn't be. It's just hyped up, you know.
Yeah.
But it really is worthy of. It's worthy of the hype. I would say the storyline, the goriness is not. It's too much. But if you can stomach it to the end, you were like mind blown at the creativity it took to make that come together. It's good. But yeah, same kind of premise is my
It
point.
just gives you all these other questions that it's like, yeah.
I think that's why you like it. You end the show questioning your own internal ethical compass. You're like, do I have that? What it takes to do that? Because I thought that was okay for a while.
Well, I think that those kind of stories are really good in the sense that you almost can identify with where the villain actually is. Like you mentioned Thanos, right? And like, there's a part of you which actually does identify with him, and you're like, man, is the cost of all of this, right? Truly worth it? Or the people, or the villains in films and stories and stuff like that are like, the whole world will die if we don't go ahead and exterminate this part of the world. And so you're putting this question of the raft scenario, where it's just like you save 3 people out of a raft, or do you risk, and choose these ones to die, or do you just say, you know, the heck with it and let all the rafts go?
And that's
so
exactly
things
what
like
this
this,
is.
he's like, Oyarsa is like, you know, you spend all this time flying from what you know will overtake you in the end. The weakest of us doesn't actually fear death. You know? And
that's kind of, see, I don't know what that is. I don't know if that's like what you call an archetype. I don't know what it is, but that kind of show or book or movie or whatever just really pulls at people, especially like people who think about this stuff and don't just take a show. Like, I know people who've watched Squid Game and are just like, yeah, it was good. But I'm like, no, did you not question the things that it made you think about? And, you know, so if you take it for surface level, it's probably all right. But if you go to those levels and think, I identify with that guy, that's whenever I started staying up at night, because I was like, wow, there's a part of me who sees where he's coming from and like why this had to happen, you know. And so yeah, it's a good, it's a humbling, down to earth experience.
Well, see, the people.
It's just like Dexter. I mean, I hated that show, but every week I would come back and
watch it. Oh yeah.
And it's like because I mean it's a serial killer killing other serial killers, and it's like so you're wrestling with the morality. It's like, I mean, it can't be good to kill other people, but yet it's ridding the world of serial killers. Yeah. Like it's
interesting.
Very interesting.
And then you have a Gandalf who will say, now I'm not equating Gollum to this, but saying we might yet have use. There might yet be use for the depraved, you know. And so, this is all what it is. If you good literature should do this, and one reason that it should is it actually should scare us that we can identify with that, because as Peterson says, you have to know that you are a monster. Yeah. If you don't know that you're a monster, then that's something seriously wrong with you. That you can do you have the ability to become really depraved and cause heinous activities unless you know that you're a monster as well.
Well, that's what frustrates me when people criticize Lewis and Tolkien and that whole group of people as being black and white in terms of how they see the world and morality and stuff like that. And I don't think that's true at all. And I think because I think in particular they're continually wrestling with the question of human nature, but they always do have these figures at the polar opposites of what that human nature is capable of. And you don't really ever see like the devil, you know, in either of those characters, even like Sauron, you know, or Morgoth or whatever It's
Mm-hmm.
like it's a fallen angel, you know. Like it's not like the devil and Sauron is a lieutenant in the army. And there's like almost this sense of like there's tragedy that's there if you know the backstory. Same thing with like the queen and the witch. Like she kind of plays the devilish kind of character, but I don't know, like anybody else in between too is just on a full spectrum that's there. And it's not this black and white. It's this question of what's
Well, pure evil is too easy.
Yeah, it's true.
If so, it's like Alison McGrath says. If you read The Wizard of Oz, the author tells you this is the good witch, this is the bad witch. Oh, so I know who to root for and root against.
right.
Lewis just says it's the white witch, it's the queen of Narnia.
You figure it out.
And you go, do I know if it's good or bad? How do I know? And so, in Lewis, you have to pay attention to behavior. You have to see what happens, and then you make the judgment, because we don't know if Ransom's good or not. We,
I would question that half the book if he was really who he said he was.
Yeah,
I was
'cause-
like questioning him a little bit.
yeah, and you should, and that's what Lewis is saying. You should question. You have to wrestle it, and so like Randy and I were talked once. There's a podcast that we did. You guys can go listen to it. But we talk a lot about atmosphere. Narnia teaches kids how to learn to wrestle, how to wrestle that morality and gain tools and equip themselves so that you can do this. And so when you watch TV and literature, that is a sort of a parallel universe to us, and going, you're going to enter into this atmosphere. You're going to, in a sense, we find a character we relate with, and almost in a sense, it's like an avatar. We put ourselves into that body, and we are seeing through that character's eyes as that character. We take on its consciousness, we take on its actions, its behaviors, if we identify with it, and then we live that life of them through watching the TV. That's why when our character dies, I mean, we are so heartbroken because we are in that universe. And so if we see somebody who is a monster and we go, ooh, I mean, Grindelwald, his speech at the end of The Crimes of Grindelwald, I mean, he set it up masterfully. And you go, it was kind of convincing.
Yeah, I was kind of rooting for him.
And you go, he's not wrong on some of the stuff.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it difficult, because you have to go, and this is real life, it's never black and white. It's never this thing right down the middle.
Which I think is why you continue to hold out some hope for the characters like Gollum and Weston and so forth, is you're like, there is still this little thing that's in you that could turn on the right time.
Vader.
You know? Yeah.
It's like, are you gonna finish it? Because I don't want to spoil anything if you are. Squid Game.
Oh, my student already spoiled it for me by writing an ethics paper about it, and
So you're
yeah, I had to read the whole synopsis
Oh.
because I had to grade the paper, so I
That
definitely
sucks.
got the end spoiled.
Okay, well, I didn't want to ruin it. I hate when people spoil things, but it goes really great with what you were saying about it's hard to tell sometimes who's the villain and who's not, and when you start to relate to someone, you know. But the guy who created the whole Squid Game is your favorite character from the start. He's in the Squid Game. He's in it, and he's your favorite character the whole time. He's an 85-year-old man with a brain tumor, and he's like your favorite person, and you're rooting for him. He teaches lessons, like he's so full of wisdom. He's like teaching things throughout the games about like kindness and how to be good to people. And at the end, he's the one who created it because he saw injustice and he thought these people deserved a chance, like a second chance at life, even if it meant 500 people dying. At least some people got a chance to like fight for something, and to like what that was like to fight for freedom and like fight for something. And so it just like brings up this thing, like sometimes you don't. It's so hard to sometimes figure out who is the villain. I think that's what even struck me is, you know, you talk about like you wrestle, you know, who's good and who's bad, but sometimes they're so disguised in real life and in you know, any kind of film or literature that it really makes you think, it's not as easy as I thought it was to even, with the tools we have, to fight this out. Like sometimes it takes time, I guess is the best way to put it. It takes time to really work through this.
We just finished the Hunger Games again.
Oh.
We just rewatched the Mockingjay Part 1, Part 2. And you see that the whole time you're watching it, you're like President Coin, or you know, Coin is General Coin at this point. She's the good guy because they're fighting President Snow. So obviously you have good and bad, you know. But Katniss sees through that, and she knows that I have to take the shot.
Yeah.
and you go,
She also gets clued in by the villain.
she gets clued in by.
Because they somehow you trust the villain because the villain and she have decided we will not lie to each other,
Yeah.
no matter how deceitful he is.
Well, sometimes it goes back to what you're saying about evil being easy. It's too easy. Like in this Squid Game, there's a guy you hate from the start, but it's easy to pin him. And there's a kind of a meme going around that says you would rather be this guy than this guy, and it was the evil guy is who you would rather be than the guy who betrays everyone at the end. Like you would rather know evil and fight against that than to choose to fight against someone that you really aren't sure that betrays you in the end. So I don't know. I feel like it's just a good learning lesson, like I said, of how difficult it is to figure that out. And sometimes we're wrong. I think that's something we don't ever want to stomach. Sometimes we're wrong.
Yeah, we root for the wrong team.
Yeah.
I wrestled with that in the MCU, all during the Infinity War saga. Thanos was the bad guy, his snap, and you were really rooting in Endgame for all the Avengers to do the blip and bring everybody back and stuff like that. But then I watched the Disney Plus series Falcon and Winter Soldier, which is wrestling with the aftermath of everybody coming back and stuff. And that small group that was fighting for the rights of the people who had been there after the Thanos' first snap and had filled the gaps and been able to move in and have homes and stuff like that. And the blip comes and all of a sudden they're homeless again. They're shoved into refugee camps and such, and they're fighting for their own rights and stuff. And it's like, well, who was the bad guy? Was it Thanos with the way he went about it? Or was it our Avengers for bringing everybody back after 5 years and people had settled in and moved on and stuff, and then they dump all the people back into the world?
So the danger of all that, because it just says that the danger of all of that is then you can take that in two directions, one of which being everything is gray, and it's only a degree, and morality and good and evil is only a matter of degrees.
Dangerous.
Or I think you do what Lewis and Tolkien do and say it's a matter not of degrees, but it's a matter of human nature.
Yep.
And our ability to buy in to really, I think what Lewis and Tolkien do in a very black and white kind of way is set up ideas as either good or evil.
Yeah.
Or systems as either good or evil. Where it's like, death is evil in Tolkien's world, or at least a certain kind of death, right? But then you have the noble death and everything like that. There are two questions. Those are two differing ideas, but it's the question of how the characters play into that actually decides whether it's actually a good death or it's a tragic evil death or something like that. So I just think we can run the risk, and I think that's how one of the ways we've seen society kind of go more into a pluralistic, relativistic thing, because we recognize how everything's black and white. So we're like, well, if it's not black and white, therefore it's a matter of only degrees. And I think we've kind of missed the boat.
That's unsustainable.
We said there's no human nature. There is no human nature, and that's what you're left with.
Yes.
And that's so important, because I think the themes of these books and Tolkien's books, the morality, they always center it around trust. It's all about trust. It's all about trust in the creator, in this sense Malelville, and in that sense Eru, but the trust that the divine being is who the divine being says they are, and that we are who he says we are.
Yeah.
And everything else, all the bad decisions flow out of a lack of trust in that.
Yeah.
And Lewis even goes so far as to actually bring it into the garden in the next one, and bring it in and out of there. But you can see it always harkens back to the garden every single time. Every single time, it always harkens back to the garden.
Choice.
And even in Avengers, I don't know if they did this deliberately. They may have. Thanos retires to a garden.
Yeah.
So in his mind, he's going back to an Eden sort of space. Actually, if you don't, I don't know how many people know this, but in Avengers Infinity War, Thanos is the protagonist. They set up the entire hero's journey is Thanos. So he's portrayed, if you follow the story, the hero's journey story, every single beat is Thanos the whole way through. But anyway, tangent. The garden narrative of I'm going to trust in what has been said about me and about the Creator. It all stems from that. Like even some of the discussions that Ransom has with the cross and Ransom has with the Sorns, it's usually like him at some point going, well, why wouldn't you want this? Like, well, why would we? Why do we need that? Why we trust Oyarsa to take care of us. We trust Malachanrian to bring the rain. All that kind of stuff.
Well, 'cause our choice is going back to the garden. What is the thing that happened?
Yeah, the fall is what spurred this fall is what spurred our rise.
And Satan said you can't what? You can't trust him.
Yep.
And so our whole fall, our whole human nature is built on distrust.
Yeah.
And Lewis is trying to get us back to the point of trusting. We wrestle with this. So why do we think that Malachanrian and the Oyarsa said that? Why do we trust him? It's because given the best arguments of the human nature that Lewis throws, of the Westons, the Divines, and they're even Ransom, even his innocence, their arguments don't stand up, and they're defeated. And so we go, oh, well, this guy says this, and he defeats all the arguments. So whatever his character is, I want to aim at that.
Yeah.
There is this section in chapter 16 towards the end of it where he's talking with the Prasa and says they were astonished at what he had to tell them of human history, of war, of slavery, and prostitution. And then it is because they have no Oyarsa, said one of the pupils. It is because every one of them wants to be a little Oyarsa himself.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And so kind of just to David's point there, like,
Yeah.
and I think that's where that again, that thing of degrees and stuff like that really matters in our culture, because we don't not use language of good or bad. We use that a lot, but we don't use the language anymore. I think we have, and I think this is where you remember one time we did Letter from Birmingham Jail, right? And it's all about who you are, who we are, right? And what we're doing is based on, who we are called. Right?
We ought to be.
Right? And so, he's bringing in Barth and Bonhoeffer and Augustine and Jesus and so forth, and saying this is part of this is our human nature. This is what we're capable of. This is who we are. Here's our intrinsic value.
Yeah.
And that's what we're fighting for. We don't talk about intrinsic value anymore, or human nature, or human orientation. We just talk about good and evil as if it means something. But like David said, it doesn't mean anything unless there's Oyarsa to actually say that when we're on Oyarsa, we just get to define that ourselves.
So I think he sums it up really well here too at the end. So at the end of chapter 20, he says, "This is after he's rebutting Weston for a while to what Weston was referring to." And Weston says, "Oh yes, and see what comes. You now have very few shut up in Handramits, and soon all will die." And Oyarsa says, "Yes, but one thing we left behind us on the Harandra: fear. Fear."
I was just going to talk about that.
Fear, murder, and rebellion. The weakest of my people does not fear death. It is the bent one, the Lord of your world, who wastes your lives and defiles them with flying from what you know will overtake you in the end. And this is my favorite part. If you were subjects of Malachanrian, you would have peace. And I think that brings back to the trust thing again there. If you were subjects. And it does come down to that, us being wanting to be little gods and determine our own fate. And it's so interesting because if you pair that with all the other things that you can see throughout the book, just connects the threads very well. And I think it, many authors have done this over time, but this book in particular does it well because it's so conversational. And all the conversations connect threads, and of course the next one is just one big conversation. So it continues to connect on through that one as well, as Ransom kind of becomes more, for lack of a better word, holy. And his
sanctified's a good word.
Yeah, it's definitely sanctified, and his
I can
journey.
sense it. I haven't even read it. And I can, based on 30 pages in, I can sense it.
So did the serpent lie to Eve? Have we become like gods? And that is that desire to become like gods has continued. That we want that autonomy. But we can't handle that autonomy because we don't have the omniscience to know what we ought to do next and what's going to come. And so we fall over and over and over again because our epistemology is not ontology. It's constantly being challenged and broken and refined, and we just don't have the tools to be our own God.
Well, I think this is the danger that Lewis sees. He keeps going back to technocracy through all of these stories and a lot of other ones, is that technocracy and technology, modern technology and modern industrialism has, where we've been exposed to that throughout all of human history by our lack of omniscience.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I want to know anything at all, I can pull this thing out right here, and it makes my omniscience seem greater than it really is.
But what's interesting is Google knows a lot of stuff, but do you know a lot of stuff? That's
it.
That's the wrestling, you know.
Yeah, it's a
But
fake
even if you
sense
did
of
know
all
all this stuff,
Yeah.
you'd still not know even.
Oh, yes.
But it's a fake sense in your
Yes.
security of
Yeah.
how well you actually know.
And you
the
trust
world.
yourself,
Yeah.
It makes you trust yourself. Yeah.
but which I don't trust
It's
myself.
a crutch
because-
we have.
Yes.
And by having that makes us feel more powerful than we really are. We were stripped with that.
Before, Jody, you had some thoughts on did David hit some of your stuff?
Yes, you read what I had.
Oh, did I?
Oh, I have it. The next page is about the fear.
You had more on there though.
Yeah, so
sure.
I want you to read what you want to do, and then let's hit some of that too.
I was really shocked, I think, when I first started reading the book, how relevant it was for today.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I got to chapter 20 and Ransom is translating for Weston, and how much of the idea of manifest destiny and his explaining himself away, always, the whole time, and the arrogance of mankind to say, anybody that is maybe less than I am, I have a right to then impose my will on them. And I just thought that was really, really good. And then what you had said.
I thought that was interesting from the standpoint that when this was written by a British
imperialist
in the Victorian era.
He was definitely slapping him in the face.
Yeah. Like, take this.
You're just dealing with India during this time,
Yeah.
and it's like,
Yeah, that's good. That's
It's a little more
That's a
personal
good
back then.
pull out.
Sorry, I just had written colonialism in the margin there.
And then I wrote up here, is it the arrogance of man without God? And then I said, or with God too. Because how
Yeah.
many times have we, as in Christian history, for the sake of Christianity, then imposed our will on a whole people group and stripped them of what they were, which he is very willing to do.
And we'll say all governments, all people of power have used religion of some sort to get authority to. Communism uses atheism, by which they've killed hundreds of millions of people. Islam is going through and ransacked most of Europe, and the Tripoli pirates. The Hindus have even so every religion, Aztecs, they use their religion to give the skies for this is good, this is the moral thing for me to do. I can just I think it was the Aztecs who killed 80,000 people one day, reaching in and ripping their hearts out in honor to their gods. And you go, oh, so when we I think this is something that until John Locke and the Enlightenment guy started talking about the individual, when you dehumanize someone, the atrocities that you can engage with to someone once you dehumanize them and take away the divine spark or take away that thing and think that they're lesser than me, what you can do to people once you do that, it's always bad when we stereotype a group in a negative way to make them lesser and subhuman, because then they don't have worth or value, and I can push them aside. Like I can just continue. If you had more.
I think you're right. Although I think Assisi actually did it way before Locke.
Okay.
And his rebuttal to the Catholic Church, especially, is going out and like handling lepers and all that sort of stuff. And then he planted, well, there are other seeds. Even Augustine planted seeds for the Enlightenment. But it's, yeah. I mean, I think too it's really scary though when you think about it, because sometimes there are true believers. Like during the Protestant Catholic Wars, like they truly believed that the other was evil.
Latimer, they just burned him alive right there in the.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen the X on the pavement where the Protestant killed the Catholics, Catholic killed the Protestants. It slaughtered them in the street in Oxford. And you're just going, what? Because you're lesser.
Yeah, they truly bought into it. And
well, if I'm a saint and you're a sinner, I'm elected.
Yeah.
You're not.
It's like I think it might be even more tied to some of the stuff we're talking about tonight, which is just the way that the enemy uses any guise that he can to convince us to do what he wants us to do, and to convince us to give into our more base lack of trust desires. Like if the Catholics and the Protestants had only trusted that God was bigger than their conception of him, it would be fine. But the enemy uses that to twist it into the idea that no, I have to do this, or so therefore I'm going to. And I think that's a really prominent theme in the book too.
I was going to say,
twisting of it.
I think a big part of after finishing the book,
Yes.
Yeah, I think a big part of this is the opposite of kind of what he's trying to pull is the opposite of trust, because they keep saying trust and trust. If you just trusted, if you just had this figure to trust, you wouldn't be this way. I think the opposite of that is just fear. Is you wouldn't have fear if you had omnipotence, omniscience. You wouldn't have that. It's impossible, right, for those two to dually live in the same place, because you know all. And so fear comes from not knowing something, and the uncomfort that comes from not knowing something. And so I think it's so interesting that he keeps talking about the fear is the problem. It's the not trust in the fear, but you wouldn't have fear if you trusted. It's like this is the root. And it goes after what you said about chapter 20, the beginning of chapter 21. I highlighted this, and that was so interesting. When he said, because even someone like Ransom, who we like, you get to the end of the book and you're like, wow, he pushed through, he did some hard stuff, and he didn't fall to the depths of what everybody else wanted with Weston, and he survived and things like that. But even with someone good like him that we enjoy, when you get to the bottom of page 142, it says, Oyarsa is talking to him, and he says, you're guilty of no evil, Ransom of Malachanrian, except a little fearfulness. And he said, for that, the journey you go on is your pain, and perhaps your cure. For you must be either mad or brave before it is ended.
Yes.
That is just so good, right?
Good quote.
That's just so good. And
Yes.
I think that's part of it, right? Because at the end, the reason it would be a cure is because he's let go of the fear. Like that would be the cure. Or he'll be driven mad into a spiral of fear.
That was Christ's admonishment to the disciples all the time.
Oh yeah, don't fear.
Be not afraid. Stop being afraid.
There would be no need for genocide. There would be no need for any of those things if fear wasn't a part. In Weston, I think that's when you really, like you said, you start to identify with Weston because you see the good, but then you also realize the jingle block that he pulls is if you didn't have fear, though, you wouldn't be wanting to do this. Like, if you didn't have fear, if Weston didn't have fear, he wouldn't be wanting to save, quote unquote, save mankind.
Like, right. Yeah. Yes.
It's interesting, too, because Oyarsa even points out after that, and he says, I give you the choice to stay or to go. Mm-hmm. And like, even after he lays out that fearful journey, and he's like, you chose rightly after you
Yeah.
chose to go. As I was like, that's brilliant. It's like he gives him the choice, and then Ransom takes the path of fear, even though he knows what it could mean. But he also knows the consequences of what would happen if he stays. And it's like in that moment, his character development is like almost complete. He like takes his first step into what he's ultimately going to become.
Right.
And it's such a backwards test of like what an Aslan would say or what Jesus would say is to give him that choice, to allow that. And then it's kind of backwards because you would think, just rationally, he would want him to stay. You know, like he'd want him to stay and whatever. But you know, if you know Jesus and you know Aslan, like they usually want the opposite of that for you. Like the thing that's going to help you the most is the thing that's going to hurt you the most. You know.
Well, that is one of the greatest archetypes in all of literature. Is you must face the thing that you're most afraid of. What you most want is in the place you most don't want to go.
Belly of the beast, right?
You have to go to the belly of the beast. You have to go into the darkness. You have to go to the depths, because there's something down there that needs to be reactivated, or something inside of you that's going to be activated. Really quickly, because this concept that we love, I just want to hit this really quickly. But if the movements were faster still, it's difficult, for you do not know many words. You see that if you made it faster and faster in the end, the moving would be all in one place at once. Small one. I think I see that. Well then, the thing that is at the top of all bodies, so fast it is at rest. So truly, body it has ceased being body at all. But we will not talk of that. Start from here, small one. The swiftest thing that touches our senses is light. We do not truly see light. We only see slower things lit by it. Love that. So that for us, light is on the edge. I mean, he's just nailing this. The last thing we know before things become too swift for us, the body of the Eldil is a movement swift as light. You may say its body is made of light, but not of that which is light for the Eldil. His light is swifter than movement, for which for us is nothing at all. And what we call light for him is a thing like water, a visible thing, a thing he can touch, bathe in, even a dark thing which when illuminated by the swifter. And what we call firm things, flesh and earth, seem to him thinner and harder to see than our light, and much more like clouds and nearly nothing. To us, Eldil is a thin, half-real body that can go through walls and rock. To himself, he goes through them because he is solid and firm, and they are like cloud. And what is true light to him fills all the heavens, so that he will plunge into the rays of the sun to refresh himself from it. And it to us is the black nothing in the sky at night. These things are not strange, small one, though they are beyond our senses, but it is strange that the Eldila never visited Tolkien.
Great divorce.
I was just about to say, that is some great divorce.
That is great divorce.
Yes. In a synopsis. Don't even need to read it. Just
And even Weight of Glory, right?
Yeah.
It is
too heavy for us to hold.
It's too heavy for us to hold.
We can just get a tiny little bit of it.
I've been trying this. Put it into better words. I've been trying to put it in say all the time that we look and we think things that are divine and angelic they're surreal and they're ethereal. Therefore, they're less solid. So why can an angel walk through a wall? Oh, it's because he's not really real. No, he's actually more real. The wall is a thing that's nothing. The wall is the vapor. It's the illusion. He walks through. It's like a hologram. He can walk through because he actually is solid. I can't walk through the hologram because I'm made of the hologram stuff. He is so far beyond that he can walk straight through because it's nothing to him. And I was like, oh my gosh.
I have to read a quote that goes straight with that. Let me try to find it. Oh, okay. So, like you're talking about things being, we went on the same path with Solzhenitsyn about art. And
yes.
How art isn't real. Art, the beauty of art is what's going to heal our world, and like what that is. And kind of just going on the same thread of art is something that is more real than real. It's more tangible than you can ever think it is. You know. And so he says this, and I thought this was just amazing. I was like, this is Lewis just shining. It's page 131 for me. He says, to every man in his acquaintance with a new art, there comes a moment when that which before was meaningless first lifts, as it were, one corner of the curtain that hides its mystery and reveals, in a burst of delight which later in fuller understanding can hardly ever equal, one glimpse of the indefinite possibilities within. For Ransom, this moment had now come in his understanding of Malachanrian song. Now first he saw that its rhythms were based on a different blood from ours, on a heart that beat more quickly, and a fiercer internal heat. Through his knowledge of the creatures and his love for them, he began, ever so little, to hear with their ears. A sense of great masses moving at visionary speeds, of giants dancing, of eternal sorrows eternally consoled, of he knew not what yet, this is a hard sentence, of he knew not what and yet what he had always known, awoke in him with very first bars of his deep mouth urged, and bowed down his spirit as if the gate of heaven had opened up before him. Sorry, that was a tough one to get there. But yeah, I just thought that was amazing. It just reminded me of Solzhenitsyn and talking about art. And when you really experience it, it's just magic. And it's something that can cure disease. It can cure all these things that we wrestle with. And I think it goes back again to fear. And I think art takes away fear. I think it lets you see something beyond, beyond.
We transcend that moment. When there's an orchestra playing and
you don't know why.
And you're moved. Do you guys know Josh Garrels? You ever heard Josh Garrels? He says when he started writing Ulysses, which is my favorite song, I absolutely love that song. He said he started strumming the chords, and it took him months to write because he would break down crying when he would just he had no words to it, but just that melody just was so deep. So
we're trying to bring you here, by the way.
Are you? Oh, we try.
There's a big back patio there on the green. We could fit in wherever people
he's
are
closer now too. Where's
he's in Indiana.
Is he still in Indiana now?
Nina tried to get him to come to our vow renewal.
Well, we're working with the seminary, hopefully, on doing that today.
That's I would love him.
By the way, Shane had feedback.
I was trying to think. I was like, this is
Oh, I knew I forgot to add somebody there to the email list.
Yeah, like that moment where you look at it and it's like,
what is this?
You never really get it back again, but you feel it.
Yeah.
In the moment. Yeah.
That's good.
He said,
Shane, you guys
this is
for
Shane.
the first few meetings here.
He's been here for the last couple. He said, let's see, I want to give some feedback, thoughts on the book. Couldn't be here tonight. I don't consider this science fiction anymore. I don't think it had enough science to call it that. It is the Ransom trilogy. I looked into some history of the book, and so many people, when it first came out, didn't realize it was a take on Christian thinking. I thought it was pretty immediate and thorough throughout. The last section has great imagery of good versus evil and folly of man. I was surprised at how stupid he made Weston when interacting with Oyarsa. I get the meaning behind his word with man needing and loving war, but his ignorance toward learning the language seemed odd.
That was arrogance.
I like
That's
the
all that
twist.
was.
I like the twist at the end as well. It was a fun literary device. He says, "Ask me questions. I'm better at writing than talking." Shane rarely,
You're really good.
unless it's like a couple people he knows really well.
Oh, well, that's what we hit on.
So yes, I'll send him the. He can listen to the podcast. So we started out saying Wooden. He's missing it on the science. What do we think at the end of this? Was it worth it? I think given our conversations where it went tonight, it was obviously something worth wrestling. Lewis is, for me, my money in his fiction. He is best in conversation. His dialogue.
Dialogue's the best.
It's like Aristotle and Socrates doing their dialogues.
Which is where I think he ultimately
wanted to
go.
Yes.
He was definitely aiming for the Republic in most of his stuff. It's let's do it.
I think how you move past that stuff that's not exactly on point, as you would say, with science and things. I think the way that you don't let people lose interest in that stuff, I think it's a fine line. For me, especially, I'm out. I lose interest. That's not real. But I think why the difference between an author like him who can do that and someone else is he makes you believe it. He does such a good job of having all the characters they've bought in to where they are and the atmosphere. He just makes you buy in, almost like you have to give yourself a little piece of the book. So okay, I trust you on this before you can really experience how beautifully written the book is. So I think that's the difference in some other books that they don't really make you buy into it as much.
And I think the reason why Narnia did so much better than this trilogy is Lewis doesn't really know much about science fiction. It's not his genre, really. He is myth and fairy tale. So that is why when he starts writing those, he's fantastic. I mean, people will say that Till We Have Faces is his greatest book ever.
I gotta read that book.
I didn't love it, but when I got
loves that book, and I'm like,
when I got to the punchline,
love it.
I spent 3 days on the punchline, and I just couldn't shake it. It was so meaty and
Don't
heavy.
tell me.
I'm not going to tell you.
Pretty much everyone thinks it's just amazing.
Yeah.
So.
It's just one book.
Yeah, just one book. It's the retelling of the myth between Oriole and Cupid.
Can we just talk about the New York Times review of this book?
That is it.
This book has real splendor, compelling moments, and a flowing narrative.
Shut up.
That was,
I'm like,
Who cares?
who chose to put that in the back of this book?
for context, he hadn't published much at this point, so there wasn't.
Moments.
I think this was
Steve
his
Author.
first
Yeah,
big one.
his first big one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they probably assigned the guy who like couldn't write the best. After
Yeah.
that review was like, it's a new guy. We'll check it out.
He's from Oxford. We'll give him. He'll throw him a bone.
Yeah.
So definitely worth the read when you get into the end of the arguments we're wrestling with.
Isn't it funny, like you're talking about, was you talking about, like, you don't usually read or watch the popular
It
things?
just depends. Some of them are just usually not mine.
But a lot of people are like that, right? They're like, oh, it's popular, I'm not going to read it.
Yeah.
And that was literally why they didn't advertise Lewis in Oxford.
Really?
Because he was a popular author, because he wrote Chronicles of Narnia.
If you're popular,
And it
you
became
obviously can't have
popular.
deep literature because it's popular. Therefore,
Yeah,
it's
that's
bad.
not true. That's why you gotta give it a chance. Just most things that are popular nowadays,
Very good.
mainstream these days, just don't really do
Yeah.
it. I'm an old soul. You know this.
Shakespeare.
Today's music doesn't go for me.
Yeah. All right. So Paralandra next week. We'll do that for a couple weeks. You guys, if you've never read Paralandra,
It's my first time.
buckle up.
You might want to, like, I don't know, smoke a doobie or something while you read the last
Smoke a
part of
joint.
it.
No, you don't say that for Last City. That City of Strength. I'd say it for like the last 50 pages.
Oh man, that's my favorite
My
part.
manifestor
Total
told me to
trip.
smoke a joint when I read this book.
No, just the last quarter, last 25% of Paralandra.
Oh, you mean when they start talking?
Where it's like, they're in like he's
Oh.
into the,
Oh, don't give anything
Just say,
away.
I hate a spoiler.
oh no. So yeah, just where it becomes a lot of philosophy.
Oh, the mountain part? Yeah. That is pretty weird.
I was like,
But it's good. It's
when
just,
I got to that part, I was like, skip forward.
In your book, you're just like trying to go up.
I'm like, you
Scroll,
won't
scroll,
scroll.
won't scroll.
I'm excited.
All right, and then we'll get to. I'm excited to see who thinks Paralandra is better than That Hideous Strength, and That Hideous Strength is better than Paralandra, and I think it'll say a lot about where you are philosophically and psychologically.
So Wes and I were
Wes is just silently judging us.
I can't wait for him to judge me so hard.
No, here's the thing, is
I'll
like,
say Paralandra and he goes,
Yeah. Okay.
So a few years ago, when Wes and I were reading this trilogy, we were talking to some friends, and Wes and I both were in agreement. We loved That Hideous Strength. We loved all three books, but that one we were like, it was like, yeah, this is on the ground. It's like Oxford, and it was just so exciting. And then our friends were like, really? That's the one. That was the one that was your favorite. Like, that's like the hardest one. I'm like, no, it's not. That was like, I felt like I was reading a John Grisham novel. Or, I haven't read John Grisham. Or maybe I have, but it for me, it just like I couldn't stop reading it, and it was so exciting. It was like adventure and imagination, all kinds of crazy stuff going on. And but then you said something like that as well, like that.
Yeah, I mean, I gravitate towards the conversational style of Angela and Horse. So that's why I'm interested to go back to that.
Yeah, I'm interested to see what you think of it this time around, because I never thought of like That Hideous, because I do not consider myself as a person who likes the most difficult of the books. It's just not.
Well, I love Abolition of Man, and
oh, me too.
well, That Hideous Strength is a fictionalization of Abolition of Man.
Wow.
And he says that I'm not giving anything away, he says that in the introduction to the book.
Wow.
This is the fictionalization of Abolition of
I
Man.
need to prepare myself.
So
That's
I just
Yeah, but
lapped it up.
Oh, it's good. It's so good. It's so good. Paralandra,
I reread Paralandra and I loved it this time. This is about my third time through it, and I just really resonated better.
It grows on you.
Yeah.
It's so thick.
But the whole, like, I don't know how that's where C.S. Lewis shocks you again and again. Like, how does he how did he put into words Paralandra, like the creation of a world and the creation of sin, and what's about to happen, what you're about to read?
Yeah, if you thought if you thought you wrestled in this, you're about to do some serious heavy lifting.
Also, it's all it is
Buckle
conversation. All
up,
it is
it's
conversation and silence.
That's where I
Conversation
think,
and silence.
for me, like I think philosophically, it's those origin questions.
Yes.
That really, those are like I get lost in, and I forgot how much Out of the Silent Planet did that too.
Yes.
It's been a while since I read it. I forgot a lot about how it did that, and I also forgot how, at the time of my life when I first read it, it was like, so I also read his nonfiction first mostly. So Mere Christianity kind of broke the mold for a lot of my Christian experiences.
Yeah.
And Out of the Silent Planet did the same thing, but for my imagination. And so,
Okay.
when I'm thinking about the unscientific parts of it, especially in the beginning, like my brain is just going to like, well, there's unseen things. Like who's to say there's not actual this stuff in space right now?
Yeah.
That's where my mind went
The
to.
boundaries of it.
Yeah.
That's always me. I'm like, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah,
This
I
is
believe
real.
it.
But
That's
that's
the point of science. Of what science studies what it can see.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like he's studying what we can't see.
Yes, yeah. And that's the reason in imagination that's brought together. So Lewis was the great knock. William T. Kirkpatrick was this logician that he was,
His tutor.
his tutor says, don't get an opinion about something which you know nothing about. And so Lewis is very much he's very much just analytical at this point. And so he had forged the tools of reason. It wasn't until he ran Fantastes by MacDonald that he said his imagination was baptized, almost exactly what you said when you read Out of the Silent Planet. And I think that's awesome because you need both. You need the imagination and you need reason, and you need an environment that encapsulates that and allows you freedom to go, I don't know, there could be people on Mars. It's like
Also, it goes to show that everyone is touched differently by different books.
Yeah.
I mean, like, did we talk about, like, Lewis read whatever Peter Rabbit book?
Squirrel
Squirrel Nutkin. And I'm like, I'm buying that book.
It's going to be amazing.
Little volumes, and I was in Oxford, and I found
Beatrix Potter.
I found this old, like, copy of it, and I'm reading it, and I'm like,
I don't get it. It's like, all right.
I'm like,
We do
what?
that in this group. Some people be blown away by some things, and some people say, "Yeah, it was okay."
Yep.
Levi
I mean,
Nagel
that's-
really touched some people, and some people were like, "It was good," but
Well, I judge those people.
Those people are dummies.
The only one we actually universally panned is the Numbers one, whatever that was.
Oh,
Flatlands.
Yeah.
Except for Chris. He's like, I teach
was
that to
gonna
my
say, I was gonna
students.
say,
And I'm like,
I-
what?
I think he does that just to be cool.
I like
like
that
trying to be
book.
cool, like, no,
I'll
guys.
be honest. I like that book way more than I like Beowulf. I know that's not good, but I really did.
Ouch.
I really did. I really
Ouch.
did.
What is this,
I really
confessions?
did. I really
What?
did. I like Flatlands. The concept of Flatlands way better than I liked Beowulf.
Oh, this is an after woonding. Was that
I
necessary?
need to
I feel so
Again.
betrayed right now.
Well, I need to go for it again, but I just
I've got a
can't.
confession to make too. I think C.S. Lewis was a hack.
You're entitled to your opinion then.
I think if you give me 20 years and I read it again, maybe I'll change my mind. 10 years.
Oh, I didn't like it. So.
No, Nina didn't like
I
it.
couldn't
You know
even
what?
get
No,
through
you're right.
it. I
You're
couldn't
right.
get through it. I
Yeah,
really couldn't.
100%. It takes like a lot of time to get synced with that stuff
I
because I
think,
could
yeah.
not read it when I read it when I was like in my early 20s.
See,
to
that's what I'm
not-
saying. I'm just not
Yeah.
there yet.
Not 30s, got
You're
lost.
too young
Honestly,
for
wasn't
it.
my favorite either.
You're just too young for it.
I'm too young.
You're
for
young,
it.
brave,
All right,
and handle it.
I'll chalk it up to not childishness. No, what word am I looking for
My
here?
little pea brain just can't.
Immaturity. No,
That's
that's
what I
not
say
right.
about
Wait,
like
wait.
when anytime
Yeah.
there's like a woman thing, I'm like, my
Life
female brain
experience.
is too
Chalk it up to
tiny.
that.
Hey, I get
Life
a wash though
experience.
because I love Sherlock, so I get a wash because.
All right.
Balance out. She was your support
Yes, that's
system
true.
in
That's true.
Sherlock.
That's true. You're allowed back in.
Thank you.
Sorry, my bad.
Yeah. That's what I was with Beowulf though when I first read it in college. I
Get
just
through
could
it.
not get it. But,
But
this
if you-
last time it was.
If you love Tolkien, it's hard not to see Beowulf through that lens.
I think that's
this
why
is
because I did like The Hobbit. Average. I didn't love it. I thought Lord of the Rings was okay. I can't even look at it right now. I read the first two Lord of the Rings, and they
Tears
were
fall on the
okay.
floor.
I couldn't-
Confessions in VFF.
Yeah, I couldn't. I think if I try again.
You know what? I'll tell you what. I'm gonna send you my collection of radio drama version of the entire book.
I will.
Sound effects, soundtrack for the movies, and the guy does all the voices.
I've never seen the movies either, so
What?
like any of the Hobbit or I read that. I haven't watched the movies. Yeah.
That's coming.
I don't know how you dodged that one.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, let's. I'm gonna cancel this out.
Well, we're gonna wrap it up and then we can
All right.
chat for 2
All right,
seconds.
so we're gonna cancel the night. Not cancel. Just.
We're canceling.
We're canceling at the last minute.
Yes, we're actually going to have a separate session called Confessions, and people are going to just actually tell us what they really think about these
VFX
books.
confession.
Taylor needs
Yeah.
intervention.
All right, so further up.
Further in.